I'm Brandi Kruse, and this is Politics Unpacked. Politics Unpacked is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42, making Washington a place for all to prosper. Sign up for their newsletter at future42.org. Welcome to Politics Unpacked for this 13th week of the legislative session. There are only 2 short weeks left in the session. This week started off slow, but it ended in pretty dramatic fashion with a few controversial bills coming to the Senate floor. I want to start by talking about rent control. Rent control has officially passed the state Senate, but not in the same form it arrived on the floor of the Senate for a vote. The bill that arrived in the Senate, House Bill 1217, put a 7% cap on annual rent increases. But fearing that that could do too much to destabilize the housing market across the state of Washington, a Democratic state senator, Senator Sharon Shoemake, introduced an amendment that would change that 7% cap to 10% plus CPI. So essentially, a landlord could increase rents by 10% a year plus the cost of inflation.
7% cap, I think, is dangerous. I hope I'm wrong. Economists have been wrong in the past. We get better data, we get better methods, we do additional studies. We find out that that happened there, but it didn't happen here, so let's learn more about this. But the research as it stands suggests that 7% is risky. And so I'm asking for a 10% cap with a CPI adjustment, because that might be risky too, but it's less risky. And I think we need to take care not just of the people, not just of that woman who I am worried about, and I am worried about her family, and I do care about people. And I am not doing this to support the landlords. I am doing this to support the people that are not just housed today, but are going to be looking for a place in 5 to 10 years.
After that amendment was introduced by someone on their side of the aisle, all hell broke loose, and I'm not exaggerating. Some progressives who were in favor of rent control were scrambling to try to make sure there were enough votes to defeat the amendment, but with all Republicans voting in favor of it and a handful of Democrats, it passed. The final state senator to pass the deciding yes vote was Democratic State Senator John Lovick. At the time, the Democratic Majority Leader was literally standing behind him, trying to pressure him to change his vote. Here's how it played out on the floor.
Lovick.
Senator Lovick, how do you vote? Senator Lovick, how do you vote? Senator Lovick votes aye.
Mr. President, there are 25 ayes, 24 nays.
Having received a majority vote, amendment number 0345 is adopted.
Now, with that amendment, rent control passed on the Senate floor, mostly along party lines, with one Democrat voting against it. Senator Emily Alvarado is the sponsor of the bill.
I'm disappointed at this point of where we are, of the changes that were made here that I think strip far too many people of the protections that we could have afforded them. But still, this bill is important, and you've heard the opposition arguments already. You've heard what critics say about this bill. Some people say all we need is new housing. All we need is supply. Well, supply is absolutely necessary. Absolutely. But it's not sufficient. It's not going to create relief for people now. There is no plan to produce the housing today that helps our constituents today or tomorrow or for the next few years.
So here's what happens now. That version of the bill that was passed out of the Senate with that major amendment will head back to the House for reconciliation. The House, if it doesn't agree with the amendment, might just decide to kill the bill altogether. But if they vote to approve the changes, then the bill will head to Governor Bob Ferguson's desk for his approval or veto. He hasn't really said much about whether he would sign any version of rent control, let alone the one that was just passed. Friday also brought its fair share of drama and controversy on the Senate floor, where they voted completely along party lines to upend last year's Parental Bill of Rights initiative. Claire Wilson, State Senator Claire Wilson, is the bill's sponsor.
Youth, especially vulnerable youth who I've worked with all my life, they need our support, and they need to hear it, they need to see it, and they need to know it. Vulnerable youth are also the ones that are most likely to experience things like suicidal ideation. They're ones that experience homelessness. They face discrimination, harassment, and they have lots of issues related to their mental health and their behavioral health and their social needs. Scholars who are most likely to have attendance and truancy issues are also students who have been victims of harassment, intimidation, and bullying in their schools, and we heard that today. Students who are intellectually disabled, developmentally disabled, LGBTQIA+ students, students who are neurodivergent, immigrant refugee students, all vulnerable students, oftentimes are victims of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And when school districts willfully do not comply with certain educational requirements in state law, it's problematic for kids and families, and it's problematic for our K-12 system, and it's problematic for me. And it's important that we ensure every student, and I mean every student, has access to a supportive environment and responsive learning environments, regardless of how they walk this world, where they come from, or what their lived or life experience is. Unfortunately, I've heard stories, and I've said this before, from parents and students have been negatively impacted by blatant disregard they've experienced. And I will tell you, I've had a group of 6 parents in my office who look really normal, just like me, who have small children who are challenged right now with their sexuality, and we're talking small children, and families are trying to find their way through this system, and they're looking for support. And the place they go is public school. And it's important that we support families and we support, again, all children.
Republicans mostly argue that it's an insult to voters to change after just 1 year the initiative that gave parents more rights to know what's happening with their kids at school. For example, if a child is going to school and identifying as a gender or by a name other than their birth gender or their given name. Democrats mostly tried to downplay the changes to the Parental Bill of Rights, saying this is just about making a few tweaks to bring the law into alignment with health information protections for kids. Now, despite there being only 2 weeks left in the session, we still really don't know how the state budget is going to come together. Democrats have been negotiating amongst themselves behind closed doors. Democratic leaders did have a press availability on Wednesday where they addressed concerns over proposals to increase property taxes.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how property tax works, and I suspect that as the session proceeds, that we are likely to have a lot more discussion and public conversation to help people understand what the proposals that are on the table would actually do to their taxes and what they would not do. There's a lot of demagoguery about that.
Those remarks came after Republican leadership had a press conference and invited Washington homeowners and landlords who would be impacted by property tax increases to come and speak.
You know, a lot of times we try to absorb the costs of different things that rise, you know, electricity rates, garbage rates, taxes, because we try to keep the people in the places that we've rented to them. And we've done that a number of times where we just try to, you know, basically not raise the rent, but if this goes the way they're talking about, there's going to be a lot of people out on the street. We're just not going to be able to absorb anymore.
You'll recall that the budgets that Democrats passed in the House and Senate were thrown into disarray when Governor Bob Ferguson said he wouldn't sign them, saying he did not want to balance the budget based on their proposed wealth tax, which would have taxed worldwide wealth for people who have over $50 million in assets. He said he didn't know if that would stand up in court, and if it didn't, they'd be right back to where they started. So it seems like for now, Democrats are trying to balance the budget based off of property taxes and some business taxes. But even with the clock ticking down on the session, they're keeping things pretty quiet in their own caucus. That has been Politics Unpacked for this 13th week of the legislative session. Have a fantastic weekend. And don't forget to vote in the finals of Future 42's Olympia Madness, where they let you decide what the worst bill of the 2025 legislative session is. You can vote on Future 42's Instagram and X accounts at Future42.org. Politics Unpacked is brought to you by Future 42, making Washington a place for all to prosper. Sign up for their newsletter at future42.org. And in the meantime, join us 4 days a week for our live show, Undivided, where we give context and have important conversations about what's happening in Washington state and beyond. Undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com.